Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this video that I hope is going to inspire you to be the best chess version of yourself. Today we are going to be taking a look at the 10 worst blunders in chess history, almost all of which were played by some of the greatest grandmasters who ever lived. So if they're capable of hanging pieces or checkmates at the highest level, you should be absolutely okay sitting on the toilet and blundering pieces of your own. And before we jump into the games, I just want you to say hello to my newest art piece that I've added to the room. It's a sculpture that weighs like 30 pounds and it's called Coffee Cup Money. This cup is so iconic to New York City diners. It's so chaotic, it's so fun, and I figured it fit my personality, so I decided to get it. Also, now that I'm reviewing it live on stream, it's tax deductible, so love you, IRS. I don't exactly remember how it looked, but let's get into the games. Our first horrible blunder is set in Havana, Cuba in 1892. Our two protagonists are Mikhail Chigorin and Wilhelm Steinitz, two of the best players of the 19th century, absolute pioneers of the World Championship throne, and we're actually there for the 23rd game of the World Championship match between these two players. Now, after a King's Gambit, which is how you know it's 19th century chess, the King's Gambit is played after e4, e5, f4, and constantly paved. Knight f6, e5, knight h5 is actually a very trendy modern main line. Nowadays, white likes to take the center, and basically black hangs on to this pawn by virtue of the fact that g4 is met with en passant. Otherwise, the knight would just be trapped. Which, by the way, probably made en passant even, like, a rule. People got tired of getting their pieces trapped like this. They were like, you know what? No, I want to implement en passant. So after an opening where black does begin to fight back for the middle, we have some exchanges. White decides to give away the center pawn on e5 to take the knight on h5 and potentially open up the position with the doubled h pawns taking on e5, queen trade. But black decides not to take with the bishop and rather comes in with the knight to maybe go to d4, maybe come into c2, not right away, but in the future, because all the pieces are on the back rank. Bishop f4, bishop f5, and materially speaking, it's equal, but black is better, because black has a bigger target here, and obviously white's pieces are slightly lagging in development, although obviously the doubled pawns are not very pretty. Anyway, that's not why we're here. We're here to see the blunder, so let's keep moving. Rook e8, here comes one black rook. White throws the knight forward. The bishop has to retreat out of danger. White throws the second knight forward. Now we see the difference in the quality of the knights, right? They're not on d1 and e1. They're on g5, d5 doing stuff. Now black plays bishop takes e5, taking the pawn. We have another trade here. And now rook c8. At this point, it seems like white kind of has figured out their position, but black does maintain an initiative by virtue of how active the pieces are. The rooks are really strong. The bishop covers all entrance points here. And after knight to d4, the initiative now immediately turns over to black. King f2. And now actually Steinitz utilizes his potential weakness as a deflection to get the bishop off the diagonal because then, you know, he's going to win important squares over here. White decides not to take, instead moves his bishop to d6. The knight jumps back to d4. That's actually crazy. Look at that. C takes d4. Allows check here and here. Steinitz is all in. But he actually doesn't realize the fact that even though he wins the pawn, black's attack is gone. I mean, I don't exactly know what happened here, but it's 1892, okay? Chess was insane back then. The guy just gave up a knight for no reason. And now he's like, well, I still have an attack. I'm going to somehow get my bishop over here, and I'm going to win the game. Okay? So king g7, rook e8. In comes Chigorin, threatening mate of his own. Bishop f8, now bishop h6. That's just going to be checkmate. I mean, that's it. The game is over if he gets bishop f8 and bishop h6. So f5, trying to get the king a little bit of breathing room. It's completely lost here. It is over. All right, all he has to do is play check, force the king to the back rank. I mean, I don't know, play knight e6 now, move back the bishop, forever stop mate, push the pawn. Like, black has no counterplay at all. But he plays knight to e6, rook e7. So he kind of tangles his pieces, and now the bishop is kind of defending two things at the same time. So we have rook e2, d5. This little clump here it's not so clear what's happening here. Now we have rook to d2, and in this position, Mikhail Chigorin was like, you know what? I don't really want to lose this rook. Sorry, I don't want to lose this pawn. Sorry, that's a pawn. That's not a rook. All right, you clicked on this video. I'm supposed to have some chess knowledge. That's a pawn. He's like, I don't really want to lose this pawn, but I don't have much else that I can do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to force this to get taken, and then I have a little tactical trick. Bishop to b4, so that if he takes my pawn, I have this very tricky fork. And then if takes, I take with check, or I take with check, and then I win both rooks back. I'm so smart. Boom, boom, boom. But bishop to b4, folks. That bishop used to guard this. This guy blundered mate in 2. One of the greatest players of the 19th century blundered mate and resigned after rook takes h2, because after king g1 it's just mate. One of the classical double rook on the second ranked mates in the world, especially when the king is castled, because the king's own rook boxes it in, otherwise the king would be able to run. This dude, straight up, in a dead one position, went full guess the elo. This is the first known episode of guess the elo right here. This dude hung mate in 2. That's how you know this is going to be a good video. Let's go to the second game. We're going to fast forward now to 2015, and this is in Berlin, Germany. This is the World Blitz Championship. We have Magnus Carlsen, already the world champion, and Vasily Ivanchuk, whose name is actually now Vasil. At the time of this game, it's Vasily. He officially changed it, I think, a few years ago, but that's neither here nor there. There's also a very funny clip of this game. Very complex position, opposite side castling, and here Magnus plays the move knight e4, trying to trade the bishop. Ivanchuk plays bishop d4, attacking the queen. Now we have queen d2, queen a2, queen f4. It's crazy that Ivanchuk is just hanging out here with the queen and taking pawns, which could potentially just open lines to his own king. But he doesn't believe in Magnus's attack. Magnus's bishop is completely stuck here. It's not really doing too much, and Magnus plays b4. Now it's going to get spicy. All right, very spicy. I'm talking like third to last hot sauce on hot ones. Spicy. b4. Black plays bishop e5, attacking the queen. And obviously the players don't repeat moves here. Ivanchuk plays c4, keeping the b file closed. Such an instructive move, otherwise bc5 occurs. So he plays c4, knight c3, queen a6. Now we have queen d2, rook c8. I mean, at some point the position has to open up. It's coming, don't worry. Plays e3, and Magnus seems to be building something up on that queen side, but not so fast, because Ivanchuk here plays this move. And now you know this structure is not going to survive too long. This bishop is in here, the queen pressures, bishop pressures, rook pressures, and this rook is coming. One more pawn move and white's entire position is going to fall apart. So Magnus says, me take pawn on h-file. That is the most disrespectful move I've ever seen in my life. He's like, I'm going to create an attack on the queen side. You're going to create an attack on my king. I'm just going to take a free pawn. I don't give a damn. Magnus Carlsen, who are you? Ivanchuk? All right, Pog. Boom, boom. Someone's going to lose in the next few moves. Pawn takes f4. Bishop f4. Queen slides back. Ivanchuk says, open up. I'm knocking on that door. So Magnus plays f takes g3, tries to call the bluff. Yo, watch this move. Rook to f1. Now, in this position, white should sacrifice the queen. Because after bishop f1 and rook f1, it ain't pretty, but you're going to survive. But it's really tough to do that in blitz. In blitz, Magnus went rook f1. That's not a problem. Queen f2's coming in. I'm going to keep my queen around here and stop it. And here Ivanchuk damn near fell out of his chair, because there's queen to g1, which Magnus just overlooked. I highly recommend you go look at this clip on YouTube. It's really, really funny. Ivanchuk like picks up this queen and just plops it down here, and then Magnus resigns because it's mate in 2. It's mate in 2 with queen g3 or rook g3. And there's many, did I say mate in 2? Well, it's mate in 2, including this move. So mate in 2, queen g1, and then queen g3 or rook g3. From here, it's mate in 1. There's also mate in 2 here, you know. But yeah, Magnus Carlsen in a blitz scramble hangs a checkmate, hangs a long queen move, and then proceeds to storm out of his chair. Yeah, there's a couple of highlights from that tournament. I highly recommend you go check it out. Let's go to the third game. This one is also a favorite on YouTube. It is the game between Viswanathan and Garry Kasparov, one of many, many battles. This one we also can pick up around move 20 in the middle game. Garry has created a very powerful initiative with his kingside pawns without actually castling his king. He did this in many different Sicilians when he played against Anand. Well, I mean, now he has to convert it. The problem is his position is a little bit double-edged, just a little bit. And there's enough risk in the position, although he's got some knight hanging out on a3, constantly pressuring on c2. And of course, you know, Geneva, Switzerland, 1996. I don't have to preface it. It's all there. Rapid and blitz event. Now, queen a5, also a clip of this game. You can go find it. h4. Garry is coming in with h3, g3. I mean, he's right there. And, I mean, he's on the verge of just completely blowing apart white's position. He transfers his knight into this nasty post on c3 from where the knight is hit, the rook is hit, the pawn is hit, this hits, and meanwhile the king cannot escape. I featured a game in another video where Garry ended up getting his queen to a8 and damn near checkmating Anand on g2. Yeah, Garry was like the master of these sorts of positions. So, knight d3, rook c1. Now Gary's like, all right, I'm going to take this pawn. It's a free pawn. I'm going to take it. Knight takes e4. f5, I'm going to keep the e-file closed so that Anand can't create counterplay. Anand just tries to open up something because his position's not very good. He's got to create some sort of complications. So he goes knight f5, and he's still down 2 pawns. He's 2 pawns down, clean 2 pawns. He's not going to resign, obviously, because there's enough play left in the position that he, he can maybe create some chances. Just maybe there is something that Garry might mess up. So what does Garry do? Brings both his pieces. He's going to take on e3. He's going to trade queens. He's going to trade knight for bishop. He's going to be up 2 pawns in an endgame. Anand's not going to get that counterplay that I mentioned earlier, and Anand is going to resign. That's a pretty good game plan. Rook to e1. Now, here, black has a lot of moves. Black can take on e3 with that knight. Knight e3, queen e3, rook e3, castle, something. Even f5, by the way. Because if the rook takes, then this rook takes this pawn. And now once black gets in, it's just over. I mean, black is so defended here. And white's position is just totally dead. Black can play f5 and f4 now. Black can also castle f5 or take. And now you might be wondering, well, what's the difference between taking on e3 with the knight or the queen? And clearly, Kasparov also was thinking that. It really doesn't matter. It's the same trade, right? Because the queen's going to take. So he played queen e3. And then his eyes became the size of, like, grapefruits. Like, there's a really funny clip. Because, as it turns out, queen e3 loses. Because here, there's the blunder heard around the world. Queen takes g4. Now the queen is hanging, the rook is hanging, and the bishop is hanging. And in one move, after 32 moves of greatness, the 33rd move that black played lost him the game. It's still not over, but it's quickly going to get out of hand. Kasparov now has to castle and sack his queen to have a bishop and a rook for it. Queen takes h3, both pawns are gone. Queen comes into d7 and starts beating up everybody. The queen is pissed off, y'all. She is pissed off. She's about to just beat everybody up. All right, a5, you got to save some of the pawns. King g2, just making sure there's no weaknesses on the king. Knight b2, knight c4. And the thing is, you're going to have to move one of those pawns. And the problem is that black is paralyzed. Black has 2 pieces that just can't play right now. So d5, knight d6, and Anand is not going to look back. He hides his king on the edge of the board because it's safe there. And the queen is still pissed, yo. She's still going for that king. King h7, knight f7. You have to take it. Otherwise, knight g5 or even knight e5. This king is completely safe. Now that Garry is down a rook and he's down a knight and a bishop for a queen, he's Garry Kasparov, but he ain't gonna win down a queen. Even though white's king is looking a little perilous, completely safe. Completely safe. And Anand goes on to win on the same square on g4, where he actually won the game originally with queen takes g4. So a massive blunder, absolutely massive blunder, just forgetting that the queen stops guarding g4. That's a concept that I like to introduce to viewers as continuity. When you make a move, you have to remember what's attacking and what's defending the square. Dare I say, I am not coaching Kasparov. That's not what I'm doing. But we all have these oversights. So let's go to the 4th game. Back into the historical archives for this one, it's Tigran Petrosyan, the original, not Pipi, versus David Bronstein. And this is a matchup. I mean, obviously, by the way, the flags are interesting because I'm pretty sure Petrosyan they both played under the Soviet Union kind of jurisdiction, if you will. Yeah, Petrosyan is known for making chess massive in Armenia, and he is Armenian. And Bronstein is, I believe, even Jewish, so his family is from there. But anyhow, flags have to be the flags. Anyway, 1956 candidates. Looking to play the World Championship match. White has a really good position. Petrosyan was known for his defensive abilities and his positional skills, and he plays the move knight d2. He moves the knight out of the way so that Bronstein, his knight has nothing to trade for, and it's going to get kicked out, and then he's going to continue to dominate the center squares, and then he will make progress into the position. Okay, as promised, and now black wants to create counterplay with b5, so naturally you want to play the move a4. Okay. H5. I mean, you might as well, right? So he plays H5. Massive risk taking, and Petrosyan is like, look, bro, I could do it too. I mean, we're way ahead of our time. Super GMs love to do this in 2021, but they were doing it in 1956. In the Netherlands, by the way. F5. Might as well just try to keep going forward. Every pawn move you make, you're making damage to your position, though. These two squares are now terrible, so white plants the knight on d5. King to h7, b3, knight f3. I mean, everything is coming forward. Positionally speaking, borderline, just dead lost position for black, as white just utilizes the weaknesses that black has created. I mean, what is this? I mean, it's adorable that the king and queen just choose to give each other a hug on move 22, but that is not the way the chess pieces are supposed to be organized. e4. Takes, knight goes back to d2, sacrificing a pawn temporarily. The knight is coming back. Now, what started happening at this point of the game is that black was also running really low on time. And back then, I'm pretty sure they didn't have bonus time. They didn't have bonus time, and they didn't have, like, delay. I mean, if you ran out of time, you ran out of time, or, you know, the game was adjourned, but we're not at that point there. So Petrosyan, as the story goes, was walking around a lot. He was coming back to the board. He's like, yo, my dude, your position sucks, bro. Like, resign. I'm late to my smoke break. I don't even know what that means, but... So he just kept coming back and slowly putting the pressure. I mean, literally, you're about to watch black just make a bunch of nothing moves. As white expands on the queen side, making progress. Knight f5, there's nothing that black can do. Rook d1. Like, look, I mean, like, the knight's just dancing. I mean, he can't move. This knight can't move anywhere. It can't move anywhere. And if rook to a8, I mean, great. And then that's it. You're not, you're not going to move anywhere else. Knight d4. Knight c6. I mean, he's just not moving. He's literally just moving his knight back and forth. He has no moves. And here, Petrosyan was like, all right, it's time to go in. Time to go in. Queen d6. You know, maybe I'll play queen c7. Maybe c5, c6, bc, you know, rook b8, whatever. Okay, knight g5. I don't know. Knight g5, knight e6. And so here, Bronstein was like, well, I mean, I'm going to kick your queen out. Knight f5. And Petrosyan came back to the board and played this move. And he hung his queen in one move and resigned. Yeah. I got nothing else to say about this game. Let's go to the next one. Our fifth example will be familiar to some of you if you've been following my recent content. This is Levon Ranyan from Armenia, Jan Krzysztof Duda from Poland, and we have a French defense. If I'm covering the opening, you know it might be a short game. So d4, d5, a Wiener, so a classical French with knight c3 supporting the center. Black develops the bishop to b4 to try to, you know, undermine it. Very dynamic play now begins. White locks the center, black continues to attack it and is fully invested in giving up this bishop and damaging the structure. The problem with giving up the bishop is that queen to g4 comes and g7 is very difficult to defend. However, due to dynamic play, black is actually completely uninterested in guarding the g7 pawn at all. This is known as theory, and here black sacrifices these two pawns, while the knight guards the rook, the open file exists, and black is quick with counterplay on white's structure. That is the way this works from a theoretical standpoint. Very interesting stuff, super complicated. Now white plays the move knight to e2, preventing queen to c3 with check and queen to e5 with check. Now black needs to be precise, so he plays knight c6, white plays f4, making sure it's impossible to take on e5, d takes c3, queen d3. All seen before. All of this has been seen before, and you're not really supposed to take this pawn. As far as I remember, theoretically speaking, you either wait a little bit to take this pawn, you wait for black to commit a certain development pattern. It's very common that white just pauses everything and plays h4, and maybe even h5, and maybe even h6. Because at a certain point, even though black can castle this way, black is going to have to defend the pawn. Like, black can't just let the pawn go the whole way. So even something like this is not completely far-fetched. It's actually not. White uses the pawns as a shield for their own position and just pushes the pawn. But you have to be very, very careful when you take on d4, because what can happen is something like this. And your queen is sort of stranded out in the open, and black can castle, create threats against it, and you haven't developed quickly enough. So, queen d6, he tries to trade queens, and Duda's like, no, your queen is a problem. No queen trade. No queen trade. Ranyan here was like, if I develop my bishop, I'm going to lose my pawn. If I move my rook to then develop my bishop, I'm still going to lose my pawn. Now, if I play bishop to e3, well then knight to f5. That's pretty unpleasant as well. So I have an idea. I'm going to develop my bishop out this way and create this threat. And maybe if knight f5, I'll play bishop a3, rook d1, I'll attack the queen. It's going to be great. So black played knight f5. And Aranyán continued with his plan after 5 minutes and 43 seconds of calculation, potentially analyzing a5, queen c3, rook c8, you know, analyzing this different stuff. And he hung mate. He hung mate and won. The bishop on a3 used to protect that square. He got mated. And as far as I know, it was not a mouse slip. I said this in the video of the recap of the game. This is one of the engine moves in this position, to play rook c3. And I mean, maybe he clicked the wrong piece before he clicked the square. I don't know. I didn't ask him, but he never recorded that. So yeah, pretty crazy. Let's go to the next one. The blunder heard around the world, 1972, game number 1 between Boris Spassky and Robert James Fischer, aka Bobby Fischer. This was a crazy world championship. I highly recommend taking a look at my video. I made a video about this match. Yeah, absolutely wild stuff. And I'm just mildly distracted with something that just popped up on Twitter in the middle of recording. Anyhow, let's get into this game. Now, we're not going to analyze the whole thing. What we should analyze is from around the 20th move. Right around here. Why? Because it's a completely equal game. 2 pawns, 2 pawns, 4 pawns, 4 pawns. And the same pieces. Knight, bishop, dark squared bishop each. You plug this into an engine. It doesn't even give you an evaluation. It says, why are you still playing, stupid? Just offer a draw. Now, you can play on, and the way you would win this is to plant your pieces on more active squares, repel your opponent's forces by virtue of your pawn structure, bring your king at some point. Let's let them play it. King f1, king f8, yep, knight to e4, and they trade rooks. Now Bobby plays f6, knight d6, and his idea is he could be looking to get in here, potentially, right? But the truth is that white is just more active here. So after something like here, take, it's just, I mean, it's just a draw, right? So Spassky plays b5. And you would say, wait a minute, well, that can't be taken, but that can. That is a free pawn on h2. Yes, but it can't be taken. Because after bishop takes h2, white plays g3, and this bishop is stuck. There is actually no way to rescue it. If you play, this is a very standard thing. If you ever run away like this with a bishop, you have to understand that after something like bishop g1, there is always this move, and then king f1, king h2, king g2. So if you're going to do this, you need to rescue your bishop with a flank pawn. So something like h5, h4, now you see the problem. If takes, beautiful, you get out. So right now it doesn't work. You can't do that. So Bobby did it. He played bishop takes h2, which is nuts. It was completely nuts. The whole world was like g3, king e2, king f3. His bishop is completely trapped. After something like hg3, fg3, I mean, that's literally it. His bishop is completely trapped. I mean, maybe he thought he was escaping and just forgot about this. I don't know. But as the game goes on, the bishop is won, and it's still a tough endgame to win. But when one guy has a bishop and the other guy does not, it makes the endgame significantly more winnable. So what Spassky needs to do is make black run out of moves. You see, a guy with a king and pawns is going to have to, at some point, give your king the right of way, like exactly like this, and the king shoulders you away, you win his pawns, and all you need to do is remain with one pawn. That's not an A pawn, because if the color of the promotion square is not the same as your bishop with a flank pawn, it's a draw. But in this position, Robert James Fischer resigned. Now, if you know anything about this match, that was the only game that went this way. I think he may have lost one more game, but he won a lot of games, and he won the world championship. So this clearly woke him up, but wow. Bishop takes h2 in a completely symmetrical bishop and 6 pawns each endgame is pretty crazy that happens. But compared to some of the other stuff in this video, it's really not so nuts. All right, next one. This one might be the shortest one of the entire video. We're in the Netherlands. It's 1993. It's Anatoly Karpov with the black pieces, one of the best players of all time, and Larry Christensen, one of the greatest American players of all time. Super aggressive playing style, awesome player. And we have a Queen's Indian, Karpov's favorite. We have a3. So a3 prevents the bishop from coming to b4. It's an interesting variation, a little bit tricky to play with the black pieces. Bishop a6. So Karpov immediately goes for this, making white commit something, either the pawn, the knight, the queen, something. So he plays queen c2. Black plays back to b7, arguing that the queen is a little bit better placed behind this pawn. White plays knight c3 and is ready to play e4. So Karpov strikes in the center and then takes on d4 and plays knight to c6. I think knight c6 is a slight... I think this whole structure for black might be slightly inaccurate. I think they play bishop c5 nowadays, but knight c6... this is really the problem, is that if you take with the d-pawn, structure is symmetrical, bishop sucks. So takes, and Christensen here can develop his bishop, can attack the knight, or can develop this bishop on the dark squared diagonal. Karpov here plays knight h5 and attacks the bishop. The bishop goes here. Now, what black has to do here is figure out how he's going to develop. Because if he puts the bishop on c5, that's maybe not bad, and actually, structurally speaking, this is also completely fine. Or he can develop to e7, which is just a little bit more passive, and I think white will just get a comfortable position by kicking this knight out and then kicking it out again. However, he can also develop his bishop to d6, with the idea that after something like bishop to e2, he's going to go knight f4. So Karpov on move 11 played bishop d6. And probably anticipated that Christensen would be playing g3 to prevent knight to f4. But after bishop d6, white wins the game with queen d1. And there are two hanging pieces. And Anatoly Karpov resigned after only making 11 moves. Probably the worst loss of Karpov's career. And he did not lose many games to people not named Garry Kasparov, because they played probably over 100 games against each other. Well over 100 games. Yeah, 11 moves, 12 moves. Crazy. It's 1987, and it is the World Championship match between Karpov, who we just saw, and Kasparov, who we saw earlier. A wild game. A really, really wild game. This is Kasparov getting Karpov into the territory he likes, which is just chaos. This king is on h3 for reasons unknown, defending the pawns. Kasparov has the 2-on-1, the very famous 2-on-1 in the Grunfeld defense. This was a Grunfeld. And both sides are about to have very weak kings. So queen to e6, obviously also low time, because it's the 30th to 40th move, so time is low. This pawn is under fire. We have king h2, so he's kind of giving this up. Now b takes a4, so because he's giving this up, because if queen takes g4, then the queen side falls apart, and Kasparov obviously didn't like that. So he decided to take on a4, and now rook b4, so Karpov gives up the a-pawn to go for the knight on c4. But that allows knight d2, which is very scary, because if you take this, you get skewered, and if you trade queens to get out of the skewer, now this pawn just starts going. So knight d2, but both these players were unbelievably good at calculation. Rook a4, knight f1, king back to h3, and Kasparov plays rook to d1. Rook to d1. That's nuts. Like, this dude is pulling up. In this position, bishop f4 gives the king a little bit of breathing room, but rook d1, Karpov plays queen c2, just trying to hit that rook a little bit, and he's always got queen a2, queen c4 ideas still to trap, to trade the queen, but this is under fire. So what is Kasparov going to do? Attacks the queen, queen slides over, and now he plays the absolutely gangster move h5. Like, everything in Kasparov's position defends each other. It's absolutely unbelievable. Look at this. He's just, this king is no more. I mean, he's so close to winning. And then Karpov plays bishop e1, disconnecting stuff and causing the wires to begin short-circuiting. Oh my God, what do you play? So he plays queen d7. He backs up and hits the rook. Where's the rook going? Queen is going to a6. The queen goes to a6 to defend the rook and create a threat, which Garry Kasparov didn't see. Garry Kasparov saw this and played rook to a1, which is a crazy looking move. The idea of rook to a1 is that if you can take this, but then mate is threatened. Obviously, Kasparov's time was low, right? Mate is threatened on g4. Rook a1 threatens all sorts of crazy stuff. Hg4, rook g4, and this But Kasparov forgot about his king. And Karpov played queen takes g6. And Garry Kasparov resigned. Because now this is protected, and this is not. You will win the rook, and you will not be mated. Sometimes in positions of total head-spinning complications, you do absolutely ludicrous things, because you're just looking at 1 to 2 move combos before your flag falls, before you lose on time, and you play moves like rook to a1, and your opponent glides the queen across, and you just look at it like, what have I done? And then something probably gets thrown. Let's go. Let's keep moving. It's the World Championship match, the rematch between Magnus Carlsen and Viswanathan. We're in Sochi, Russia, 2014. And after a Sicilian Khan, the Marokshi bind, I always say that wrong, so please forgive me, we get an endgame. The queens are traded early, and then we have this structure. So white has the ugliest pawn structure ever invented, but black has dark squared problems because black has like all this liability over here, right? So king c7, and Magnus decides to play h4, h5. He's actually also a little bit maybe ahead of his time, brings the rook into the game, and it's really difficult to decide with black what do you do, because if you play h6, great, you play h6, but you freeze your own structure a bit. If you don't play h6, then I'm gonna play h6, and you're gonna have to go here. Can't let me in, and now my pawn will live here forever, so I'm gonna try to get to h7 in the future. So black does do this, and Magnus is just going to try to create some play down the middle line. But Anand was right there with him, okay? So rook to g3, rook g8, knight f8, nice and solid position. He's like, bring it. How are you gonna get through me? Okay, bishop e3. Magnus is like, I'll figure it out. hg, knight takes, rook h5. All right, defending this, pressure on h6, bishop c6. Now, why doesn't Magnus just go here? Because the rook needs to guard this pawn. So, for example, knight e5, and now black is actually just in time with some counterplay. You can't take on h6 with the bishop because there's some tactics here. Maybe even just knight e5 straight away. Rook e5, rook g3, fg3, and black is playing this for a win, if not just completely winning, because white, again, has a very stupid pawn structure. So you can't take yet. So Magnus is like, all right, that's not a problem. I know I can't take. Rook g4, I'm going to keep slowly improving my position. Bishop d1, rook d8, bishop c2, just king d2. Seems like I can't, do anything with my bishop, but king d2. Magnus Carlsen plays king to d2 with the intention of bringing the king over, maybe f3, blocking out the bishop, and slowly picking this pawn up. And king d2 loses the game. King d2 loses the game because the king should not just boldly walk like this when there are bishops, knights, rooks. King d2 loses to knight takes e5. A move that looks impossible. Because you're not going to take the knight, because you're going to lose your rook. You're going to take the rook first, and then take the knight. But you've walked your king where there is a Zwischenzug. In between move, boom! You've now down lost 2 pawns. If king e2, I take back, you're dead. And then I take on g2, you're dead. And if you go like this, I check you. That might have been what was missed. The fact that the knight can jump behind the pieces, check the king one more time, and now take. So, king to d2. But for the first time in the video, the opponent misses the response. A double blunder in the World Championship. A slow game. They both had tons of time, and they both missed it. And now Magnus scurries over to e2, hides the king on e1, and is just dominating. And Vishy, who didn't know what to do, ended up also walking this pawn to a3, and that can also be a liability in the endgame, because white has the dark square bishop. So Magnus goes and attacks the pawn, right? Keeps the pieces, and finally gives away the bishop for the knight, not sacrifices, starts picking up the pawns. That's 3 turns, 3 pawns. 4 pawns are about to fall. 4 pawns with h6 and b6. And before we can even get to that point, Vishy resigns. Absolutely insane blunder this was. I remember sitting there like, what? They both missed it, but it's not as good as the last one. Our 10th and final game is in Germany in 2006. Die Fritz versus Vladimir Kramnik, who dethroned Garry Kasparov as world champion. He was world champion himself for many years, and a pioneer of many modern opening ideas. And this is their first game, so he's getting settled. He had played a Queen's Gambit, accepted actually very early, and played a very intriguing line with b4, like I mean, you know, trying to neutralize the computer with an opening that potentially it wouldn't be expecting. And the position that we saw when we started was right here, when black just plays the move rook to c8 to defend this pawn. In these kinds of structures, if black can play c5, black is going to be completely fine, if black can actually play it. What white can do is create an attack on the king, utilizing the central space advantage, but now that white has traded off the light squared bishop, that bishop is always very useful to attack h7. That bishop is gone, so black is probably without any problems. So black plays c5. Now the engine's gonna have to figure out some sort of plan here, right? So what does it do? It goes to try to attack on the king side. I'm not stupid, all right? I know a thing or two about chess, right? That's what the engine's trying to do. Meanwhile, it's giving up its a4 pawn. Engines are really good at just being like, yeah, take that. I don't care. I don't take it. It's fine. So queen takes a4. Now knight c5, take on e3, and now we have this. So clearly, Kramnik not scared of f7, bishop c5. Now, he could have also played rook f8, but he's like, I don't care. I've calculated correctly. My king is absolutely safe on h8. He's not wrong, because this knight is never getting to g6. And by the way, even if it is, then king g7. So if the knight somehow finds a way to get to h5 and actually create a checkmate threat, that would be a miracle, because that's a lot of turns. So queen comes back to f3. And black is fine here. Black has a totally good position. Rook f8, queen e4. And again, don't forget, it's the first game of the match. So even though black might be better, black is actually completely fine with the draw. The human is completely fine drawing the first game with black from the stronger side, right? So, rook f d1. Was it the first or the second game? It might be the second game, actually. This whole time I've been saying it's the first game. Whatever, it's early in the match. It's early in the match. Anyway, rook d1, queen f7. Kramnik is creating the play on the king side and has the 2-on-1. All endgames are good for black because of the better structures. Queen f7. Queen a7. Rook f8, rook f8. He's like, yo, the engine's trading pieces with me. Now, here, black can take this knight. This is a very important moment. Black can take this knight and try to torture the engine in a queen and rook endgame. By the way, even in a rook endgame if you want, although obviously the more pieces you trade, higher chance you can make a draw, right? So Kramnik decides, no. I'm all in. I'm Vladimir Kramnik, and I can give up this e6 pawn, and I don't really care, because I'm going to take with check, and then I'm going to get this rook. Now, the problem here is that you're obviously allowing this to be taken, and your king is left alone at the mercy of the queen and the knight. So you have to make sure that you safeguard your king, right? So something like king g8 attacks the knight, kicks it out. a3, obviously, you can't play because there's all sorts of threats on your king. But what Kramnik played here was this move. And he hung mate in 1. He hung mate in 1. So I hope you made it this far in the video, folks. And truthfully, if they can blunder like that, and I can blunder like that, then it's okay that you blunder like that as well. It's really a fascinating journey that we're all on here on these 64 squares. And, you know, sometimes it's painful. Sometimes we feel the greatest bit of happiness, but we're all in this together. Let's make our mistakes together, and let's gain that sweet, sweet elo together. Peace out. I'll see you in the next video. Get out of here.